Zachary Levi was once seen as Hollywood's wholesome golden boy. Best known for his lead role in the TV series Chuck and later as the charismatic superhero in DC's Shazam franchise, Levi carved a niche for himself as a charming, relatable everyman. With a big smile, a clean record, and a career that had been slowly climbing the ladder of stardom, Levi was embraced by both fans and studios alike. His transition from geeky TV roles to a bona fide big-screen superhero seemed to mark a turning point in his career. He was now on magazine covers, attending red carpet premieres, and being celebrated as a positive role model for younger audiences. But in the turbulent arena of modern celebrity culture, it only takes one comment to flip public sentiment. And in January 2023, Levi found himself at the center of a social media storm that called into question not just his views, but his entire brand. It all began with a seemingly simple retweet. On January 29th, Levi responded to a tweet that asked, "Do you agree or not that Pfizer is a real danger to the world?" Levi, quote, tweeted the question with a brief but powerful reply, "Hardcore agree." It was just 2 words, but in a world still reeling from the COVID-19 pandemic and the resulting culture wars around science, public health, and misinformation, those 2 words ignited a backlash that would soon consume the actor's online presence. The response was swift and loud. Fans, critics, medical professionals, and fellow celebrities began weighing in, and the conversation quickly shifted from a tweet to a national debate on celebrity responsibility, free speech, and the consequences of undermining public trust in life-saving medical treatments. Many of Levi's fans were stunned. After all, here was an actor who had played a literal superhero, a character who fought for good, for truth, and for the protection of others. To some, this public alignment with anti-Pfizer sentiment, a stance commonly associated with the anti-vaccine movement, felt like a betrayal. It wasn't just about pharmaceutical corporations anymore. In the eyes of many, it was about the very real human cost of spreading skepticism toward vaccine that, according to public health officials, had saved millions of lives. Levi's statement seemed to many like a veiled endorsement of anti-vaccine narrative. And in an era where disinformation had become a public health issue in its own right, that was no small accusation. To understand the weight of the backlash, one must look at the timing. This controversy didn't happen in a vacuum. The tweet came during a time of heightened sensitivity around COVID-19, with waves of disinformation still circulating on social media and public figures being scrutinized for their influence. The United States alone had seen a significant number of preventable deaths due to vaccine hesitancy, and public trust in science was being challenged daily. In this context, Levi's comment wasn't taken as a casual opinion. It was viewed as a public stance from a person with millions of followers, many of whom might take his words as validation for their own fears or suspicions about vaccine. Levi, to his credit, did not remain silent. In the days following the tweet, he attempted to clarify his position. He insisted that his statement was not an attack on vaccines or on science itself, but was instead directed at what he saw as corrupt practices within big pharmaceutical companies. In an Instagram live session, he explained that his criticism of Pfizer stemmed from documented issues related to profit-driven motives, legal settlements, and the opioid crisis, not from a rejection of vaccine. He said he was concerned about accountability and corporate ethics, not public health policy. Yet the nuance of his argument was lost in the noise. Social media rarely deals in subtlety. By then, the damage was done. His words were already being used as ammunition in debates far beyond his control. The fallout didn't just stop at online criticism. Journalists began to dig deeper into Levi's past comments, public statements, and affiliations. His interviews were reanalyzed and his political leanings scrutinized. Suddenly, Levi wasn't just the guy who played Shazam. He was a symbol in the culture war, whether he wanted to be or not. And in a divided media landscape, symbols get cheered or torn apart with equal force. Studios that had previously promoted Levi as a family-friendly star found themselves in a tricky position, with Shazam, Fury of the Gods, slated for release. Just months after the controversy, the marketing team was faced with an uncomfortable question. How do you sell a superhero movie when the actor playing the hero is under fire? The tension between Levi's personal beliefs and his public persona was now fully exposed. He had stepped into a space where actors are no longer seen as separate from their characters. Fans expect alignment between who someone is off-screen and who they portray on-screen, especially when those characters are meant to embody goodness, bravery, and truth. But as Levi was about to learn, navigating that space requires more than just good intention. It requires clarity, timing, and an understanding of how every word you say can be amplified, distorted, and used to build or destroy the very image you've worked so hard to create. As the controversy surrounding Zachary Levi's hardcore agree.tweet gained momentum, the deeper issue began to surface, which was the increasingly blurred line between free expression and public responsibility. Levi, like many celebrities before him, had voiced an opinion that while legal carried immense weight due to his public platform, but what perhaps shocked many observers was Levi's apparent underestimation of that very weight. The public often expects celebrities, especially those who embody heroic or family-friendly roles, to model social responsibility, and when they deviate from that expectation, the backlash tends to be swift, unforgiving, and sometimes career-altering. In the days following the tweet, media outlets seized the opportunity to dissect his comment. Headlines labeled Levi as anti-vax or reckless, although his actual message seemed more critical of corporate practices than the science behind vaccines themselves. However, such distinctions are often overlooked. In the modern age of outrage, where headlines are skimmed more often than full articles are read, social media amplified the criticism, calling for boycotts of Shazam. Fury of the Gods began trending. Clips from Levi's older interviews resurfaced, and users combed through years of content looking for any signs that he had previously aligned with conspiracy theories or anti-establishment ideologies. What Levi appeared to be expressing a concern about the ethical practices of pharmaceutical giants like Pfizer is not an unusual or fringe opinion. In fact, many individuals across the political spectrum share similar worries about how profit motives and influence decisions in the pharmaceutical industry. Pfizer has previously faced scrutiny and legal battles, including billion-dollar settlements over unethical marketing practices long before the COVID-19 pandemic. But the context in which Levi voiced his opinion could not have been more volatile. His words came at a time when society was still reeling from the effects of the pandemic, when vaccine misinformation was costing lives, and when public trust in medical science was being severely tested. Levi tried to clarify his intentions, stating that his criticism was about corporate accountability rather than a rejection of vaccines themselves. In follow-up posts and live sessions, he emphasized his support for safe science-based health solutions while doubling down on his distrust of unchecked corporate power. He pointed to cases where pharmaceutical companies prioritized shareholder profits over patient care, including the opioid crisis, which caused immense suffering worldwide. His aim, he insisted, was to raise awareness, not to spread fear. Still, the damage had already been done. The public had latched onto a simplified version of his message, and once a narrative gains traction online, it is nearly impossible to reverse. The entertainment industry runs on perception, and Zachary Levi's image as a friendly, heroic figure now seemed at odds with the views he had shared. Warner Bros., the studio behind the Shazam franchise, did not issue an official statement, but reports emerged suggesting internal discomfort. Studio executives were said to be watching the situation, closely balancing between supporting their actor and managing potential reputational risks. Some promotional events for the film appeared more subdued than anticipated, with Levi featuring less prominently in interviews and press tours. There was speculation that the studio was intentionally limiting his exposure to avoid further controversy. The backlash also extended beyond the digital realm. At fan events and conventions, where Levi was scheduled to appear, some attendees voiced concerns, and a few even called for him to be removed from programming. Although most events continued as planned, the atmosphere had changed. Questions from fans were more pointed, and there was an evident tension in the room that had not been there before. Levi, who had built his brand on openness and authenticity, now faced an audience more skeptical and divided. Ironically, it was this same authenticity that had long been his strength. Levi had always been candid about his personal struggles, including his battles with anxiety and depression, and had earned respect for his vulnerability. But in this instance, his honesty collided with a topic too complex and too emotionally charged for social media discourse. His attempt to speak out on what he saw as corporate malfeasance was interpreted by many as irresponsibility and others as a betrayal of scientific trust. Once trust is broken, especially around matters of health and safety, it is extraordinarily difficult to rebuild. Levi did not retreat from public view. He continued engaging with fans on social platforms, maintaining a tone that mixed humility with resilience. He acknowledged that some people would be upset by what he said and admitted that he could have chosen his words more carefully. He reiterated that his issue was with corporate greed, not vaccines, or the science behind them. But for many, the distinction no longer mattered. The harm had already been felt, and public opinion had already shifted. His experience became a warning for others in the spotlight. In an era where every tweet can become a headline, and every opinion can spark a firestorm, celebrities are expected to be both relatable and impeccable. Social media has made it harder for public figures to separate their personal beliefs from their public responsibilities, and even well-intentioned statements can backfire if not carefully phrased. For Levi, who had worked for years to cultivate an image of warmth, sincerity, and heroism, the incident marked a turning point. It was no longer just about one tweet. It was about who the public believed he really was and whether he still deserved to wear the cape. As the controversy lingered, Zachary Levi found himself navigating not just public opinion, but the quiet yet powerful currents of the entertainment industry. While no formal blacklisting occurred, there were subtle shifts that insiders noticed. The entertainment world has long mastered the art of quietly distancing itself from risk, and Levi was now perceived as a risk. His name began appearing less frequently in casting rumors, and industry chatter that once lauded his rising momentum grew quiet. The silence said more than 1,000 headlines ever could. While his existing projects, such as the Shazam sequel, were already locked in and too far along to be derailed, future prospects seemed to hang in limbo. The marketing campaign for Shazam: Fury of the Gods became a careful balancing act. The studio chose to spotlight other cast members in interviews and press events, while Levi's presence remained measured. He was still the star, but the promotional energy behind him felt restrained. Unlike the first Shazam release, which had seen Levi take center stage in a media blitz full of charm and comic banter, the sequel's rollout was more fragmented. It was clear that Warner Bros. Was trying to protect its investment while avoiding any renewed controversies that could tank box office numbers. Meanwhile, industry observers weighed in with differing opinions. Some argued that Levi's comment had been blown out of proportion and that people should be allowed to question large corporations without being vilified. Others pointed out that the timing of his statement and the way it was phrased made it impossible not to link it to the broader anti-vaccine discourse which had caused so much harm during the pandemic. The argument was no longer just about one man's opinion. It had become a proxy war for larger societal anxieties about health, freedom, trust, and truth. At the heart of the matter was a deep tension. Levi represented a kind of celebrity that many fans longed for, someone accessible, funny, and emotionally grounded. He had always been vocal about his Christian faith, his mental health journey, and his belief in transparency. That openness had helped him build a loyal following, but it also left him exposed. In a world where digital footprints are permanent, every word is part of a larger story, one that the public gets to interpret often without context or clarification. Levi's situation echoed other celebrity controversies where a single statement triggered widespread fallout. From athletes to musicians to actors, the boundaries between personal belief and public persona have never been more porous. And while some public figures managed to weather the storm and even come back stronger, others found themselves sidelined, unable to reclaim their former relevance. What set Levi's case apart was the gray area. He had not launched into an angry rant. He had not aligned himself with conspiracy theorists. He had simply agreed with a provocative statement about a pharmaceutical company, yet that alone was enough to reshape the narrative around him. To those inside the entertainment industry, Levi's case was a reminder of how fragile a career could be in the age of social media. Publicists, managers, and studios redoubled efforts to vet every statement, every tweet, every interaction. Stars were reminded that even a moment of poor judgment could have long-term consequences, especially when tied to public health or social justice issues. For Levi, it meant walking a very narrow path between defending his integrity and preserving his career. Despite the growing noise, Levi continued to work and speak with an air of calm resolve. In interviews, he remained thoughtful, acknowledging the controversy, but refusing to let it define him. He spoke of his love for storytelling, his appreciation for fans, and his hope that people would judge him by the totality of his actions rather than a single misstep. His demeanor was not defensive, but grounded in a kind of weary optimism, the kind that comes from weathering personal storms and choosing to move forward anyway. In the weeks following the tweet, some fans returned to his corner expressing support for his right to question institutions without being labeled as dangerous or irresponsible. Others remained distant, unable to separate his views from the broader harm caused by anti-vaccine rhetoric. The division was real, and it reflected a cultural moment in which nuance had become a casualty of the information age. People were either with you or against you, and the middle ground was increasingly hard to find. As Shazam: Fury of the Gods hit theaters, the controversy inevitably impacted its reception. While reviews focused on the film's content, many critics noted the context in which it was being released. The performance of the movie at the box office was lukewarm compared to expectations, and while it would be unfair to attribute that solely to the backlash against Levi, it certainly played a part. Audience trust had been shaken, and in the world of superhero franchises, trust is currency. For Levi, the months that followed would be a test not just of public forgiveness, but of personal resilience. The world had seen his misstep dissected and magnified, but it was yet to see how he would grow from it. Would he fade from the spotlight quietly, or would he find a way to reinvent himself on his own terms without apology, yet with humility? That answer would take time. But one thing was already clear. The old rules of celebrity no longer applied, and for Zachary Levi, the road ahead would require a new playbook. In the aftermath of the controversy, Zachary Levi faced a crossroads that many public figures eventually encounter after a fall from grace. Should he attempt to redeem his public image through carefully managed appearances and brand rebuilding? Or should he lean into reinvention, embracing the role of an outsider with a different message and a more selective audience? Either path came with risks, but the one he chose would say a lot about his values and future trajectory. In interviews, Levi appeared thoughtful and unshaken, not combative or dismissive, but genuinely engaged with the conversation that had erupted around him. He did not double down on his original post, but also did not retract it. Instead, he emphasized the need for open dialogue about institutions that wield great power over the public. He made it clear that he believed in science and medicine and had no intention of spreading dangerous misinformation, yet he continued to voice concern about corporate practices in the pharmaceutical industry, citing examples of price hikes unethical, marketing and lobbying tactics that prioritized profits over patients. It was a message that resonated with some fans, particularly those who were frustrated by the increasing influence of large corporations in everyday life, but others felt it was too little too late, and that the damage to his image as a responsible and family-friendly star had already been done. Levi's team began a quiet campaign to reorient his brand. Rather than erasing the controversy, they attempted to reposition it as a learning moment. He participated in podcasts and longer-form interviews where the format allowed for more depth and nuance than a single tweet ever could. He reiterated his commitment to telling meaningful stories, both on and off screen, and spoke candidly about the challenges of being a public figure in an era where one misstep could define your entire career. These appearances were not headline-grabbing, but they were strategic, aiming to reach thoughtful audiences who might still be willing to listen. At the same time, Levi's online presence took on a more measured tone. His posts became less frequent, and more curated. Gone were the off-the-cuff reactions or cryptic responses. Instead, his content focused on gratitude, fitness, faith, creativity, and personal growth. He shared stories from his past struggles with depression and anxiety, offered book recommendations, and encouraged followers to engage with content that nourished their mental and emotional well-being. It was a return to the version of Levi that many had admired, a man grounded in honesty and empathy, trying to navigate the complexity of fame with grace. Hollywood's reaction to Levi's rebound was mixed. Some casting directors remained cautious, aware that the actor's recent controversy might follow him into future projects. Others, however, saw potential in his resilience. They noted that audiences can be remarkably forgiving when they sense authenticity and growth. If Levi could successfully reframe his narrative, not as a fall but as a transformation, he might find a new lane in the industry, one that allowed for more creative freedom and personal expression outside of traditional blockbuster roles. Indeed, Levi began showing signs of exploring that very path. He hinted at producing his own projects, telling stories that reflected his values and interests, rather than just accepting roles handed down from major studios. He engaged with smaller creators, indie filmmakers, and digital content platforms, signaling a potential shift toward a more self-directed career. While this move carried less glamour, it offered more control and, perhaps more importantly, more honesty. He no longer needed to fit into a mold created by others. Instead, he could redefine what success looked like on his own terms. Some observers noted the parallels between Levi's arc and those of other celebrities who had faced public backlash, only to emerge stronger and more focused. While the circumstances were different, the underlying pattern was familiar. The fall, the silence, the reflection, and then the return, redefined by hardship and marked by clarity. It was not guaranteed that Levi would complete that arc, but he was clearly taking steps in that direction, leaning into humility rather than hubris and authenticity rather than image. Meanwhile, public opinion remained divided. While a portion of his fan base had moved on, others continued to debate his intentions. Was he simply misunderstood, or had he carelessly amplified a dangerous message that contributed to public harm? The truth likely lay somewhere in between, and Levi himself seemed to understand that, in one appearance, he acknowledged that influence is a heavy responsibility, and that words, especially those shared on massive platforms, must be chosen with care. It was not a dramatic apology, nor was it an evasive deflection. It was simply honest, and in an environment saturated with spin, that honesty stood out. The entertainment landscape was also shifting rapidly. Streaming services, independent creators, and social media influencers were reshaping how audiences consumed content. In this new world, authenticity, connection, and transparency often mattered. More than traditional fame, Levi appeared to grasp that reality and was adapting accordingly. He was no longer just the actor who played a superhero. He was becoming something else, a storyteller shaped by both triumph and turmoil, whose relevance might be less about popularity and more about purpose. For many fans, that shift was welcome. They appreciated Levi not for being perfect, but for being real. His willingness to speak openly about mental health, spirituality, corporate ethics, and personal mistakes made him relatable even when they disagreed with his views. They saw in him not a fall from grace, but a man trying to grow publicly under the pressure of constant scrutiny. And in doing so, they found their own reflections, their own questions, and perhaps even their own hope. As the dust slowly settled around the controversy, it became clear that Zachary Levi's future would not be dictated by a single tweet, but rather by the steps he would take in the years to come. Public perception is never static. It evolves, shaped by time, consistency, and the values a public figure chooses to uphold in both moments of success and controversy. Levi seemed to understand this well. His public appearances grew more intentional, his interviews more thoughtful, and his presence more grounded. He no longer seemed preoccupied with pleasing everyone, but rather focused on standing firmly in what he believed to be truth, even when it was inconvenient. In an industry where image is currency, Levi began investing in a different kind of value, one rooted in depth rather than popularity. He started aligning with causes he believed in, quietly supporting mental health organizations, and advocating for open dialogue in divisive times, though he rarely revisited the Pfizer controversy. Directly, he acknowledged in multiple conversations that the experience had humbled him and taught him the power of words in a polarized world. He did not play the victim, nor did he act like a martyr. Instead, he presented himself as a human being who had made a statement, faced the consequences, and chosen to keep growing anyway. The long-term impact on his career remained uncertain. Some studios remained hesitant, while others began to recognize the depth he brought to roles beyond his earlier portrayals of lighthearted heroes. There were whispers of new projects, that tapped into a more complex emotional range, possibly even biographical or dramatic work, where Levi could channel his real-life experiences into meaningful performances. The industry had seen transformations like this before, where an actor, once known for charm and charisma, took a left turn into more serious, emotionally charged material. Often these turns brought unexpected acclaim. But perhaps the most significant shift was not in Levi's career, but in how he was perceived by those paying close attention. No longer just a superhero on screen, he had become something more nuanced and relatable, a figure navigating the same cultural storms as the rest of us. In an era when the internet holds people to impossibly high standards, Levi's story offered something different. A reminder that growth is messy and progress is often forged in the crucible of criticism. He showed that being wrong or being misunderstood does not have to be the end, it can instead be the beginning of a more honest chapter. He continued to engage with fans both online and at conventions, answering difficult questions with patience and often with grace. There was still criticism. There were still those who believed his original post had done harm, but Levi met them not with denial, but with dialogue, choosing to be present even when it was uncomfortable. His fans began to notice not just his performances, but his persistence. He was still standing still, speaking, still listening, and still choosing to be visible in a world that had once turned on him. This visibility mattered especially to those who had once felt silenced or shamed for their own missteps. In Levi, they saw someone who did not run away, who did not hide behind a PR team or a carefully managed brand, but who instead chose to remain part of the conversation. He reminded people that public figures are not infallible, and that even in error, there is the possibility of reflection and realignment. For many, this was more powerful than perfection. It was real, and in that reality, they found resonance. The legacy of the 2023 Backlash will always be a part of Zachary Levi's story, but it will not be the whole story. It will be one chapter among many a moment that tested his convictions and reshaped his voice, but did not silence it. His willingness to face the fallout without bitterness and to continue contributing creatively marked a rare kind of strength, one not rooted in public approval but in private clarity. He knew who he was, even when others questioned it, and that sense of self was what ultimately began to win people back. In the end, Levi's journey became less about the controversy and more about what came after. He reminded the world that people are allowed to learn to evolve and to rise from the wreckage of their own words with more purpose and more humility than before. His story became not a warning but a mirror, reflecting the challenges of modern fame and the courage it takes to remain whole within it. For some, he will always be Shazam. For others, he is something more, a man who made a mistake and then chose to walk straight through the storm.